One of the important concepts, if you're going to get into endurance racing and training, that you really want to get a good handle on is your training zones. There's a number of different ways to approach this. I like to use the 7 zone training system, and I'm going to walk you through different ways to view these zones. So, zone one is your super easy warm up, very low intensity zone. Zone two is your kind of steady aerobic zone. This would be where you would find yourself for the majority of an Ironman race, or for like a really well trained marathon runner. You might be in the top of zone two there. Zone three is what a lot of people call tempo or moderate hard. Zone four is considered sub lactate threshold, so sub LT. And then the interchange between zone 4 and zone 5 is your lactate threshold or your functional threshold power. That is the amount of effort you could hold for about 1 hour. Untrained athletes are not going to be able to hold it that long, so that is a trained athlete sort of threshold test. Zone 5, now we're going over threshold, is like considered a hard effort. You could only maintain this for 5 to 8 minutes. Zone 6 is like very hard. Now we're in the like 30-second to maybe 2-ish minutes of amount of effort that you could hold there. And zone 7 is your like super max capacity. It's all out sprinting. You could do maybe 10, 15 seconds at like a zone 7 effort. So that's the way to view it from a perceived exertion standpoint. When we're talking about heart rate training or power zone training, they're roughly the same. There's a little bit of difference on the percentage. And if you really want to get into it, you can look up lots of charts to explain all that. But the summary: zone one is going to be sort of like your up to about 60-65% of functional threshold power, um, and maybe a little higher on the heart rate. Zone two, power wise, whether you're using power for running or for biking, is going to be in that 65 to 80% range, a little lower on the bike. Zone three, again, that's your kind of moderate hard tempo effort. That's going to be in the 77 to 87 range for threshold power, a little higher for percentage of heart rate. Zone 4. The top of zone 4 with both power or heart rate is 99%, right? So you're almost to your threshold. So somewhere below that is zone 4. Zone 5 is going up to 100 107% of FTP, roughly the same as heart rate. And zone 6 is going to be up to 125% or so on threshold power. Depends on how big the gap is on your heart rate between your absolute max and your threshold, but it's going to be somewhere in between the two. And then zone 7 is max capacity over 125% of functional threshold power, which could be 200%, could be 300%, because you can put out a ton of effort for a short amount of time. Heart rate is going to be, your maximum heart rate, whatever that may be. Now, to determine these zones, it's really important to do a valid test. So you can do that in a laboratory, where they're actually pinpricking your blood and looking at your power numbers or looking at your heart rate. The easy way to do it is to sign up for a 10K run or a 5K run, or do a 30 to 45 minute all out time trial on the bike. I find those are easier to achieve outdoors. However, you may not have a safe course to do that. So if you do a time trial indoors on the bike, make sure you have a couple of fans set up and the temperatures are cooler, because you don't want your test to be limited by environmental factors like getting too hot, right? Because that's going to shoot everything up. It's going to make the effort harder. Your power is going to drop. Once you have that number, I'm going to, for purposes of this conversation, I'm going to say you did a 30-minute test. You multiply that value, let's say it's 200, power, not heart rate, and you multiply that by 0.97. I don't do math in my head that quickly, but it's less than 200, right? That would be 194. That is your functional threshold power. The reason we multiplied it by 0.97 was because you didn't do an hour. Again, the functional threshold or the lactate threshold is roughly what you could do for 1 hour. So that's the number you need to establish first. You newer athletes, if the thought of doing a 30-minute all out right now is too much, and that's valid, you want to go by perceived effort, and frankly, you shouldn't be doing anything in zone 5, 6, or 7 for quite a while. The second part to understand about all this and why it's so important for endurance racing is the energy systems that you're using. So, energy at the low end comes from fat metabolism and the current the current carbohydrates that you're consuming and the muscle glycogen that you have stored. When you get into zone 2, you're about even on fat metabolism and carbohydrate burn or glycogen burn. When you get into zone 3, you're getting more into the muscle glycogen. By the time you're in zone 4 and 5, your fat metabolism is dropping close to zero, not all the way to zero, but close to zero, and you're mostly into glycogen burn. You only have roughly 2 to 2.5 hours of stored glycogen in your body to use in an endurance event. So everything else has to come from fat metabolism or current calorie intake in the form of simple, moderately complex carbohydrates, maybe some protein intake if you've done that in training and it worked out for you, right? And then zone 7 is going into the ATP phosphocreatine zone where you have just, very quick energy available in the cells, and that's going to burn out within 10 seconds. When you're training for an Ironman, you have to look at your calories and how you're getting them in. And if you spend too much time in zone 3, let's say on the bike, you're going to burn up a lot of your muscle glycogen and you're going to bonk. No matter how much you take in, currently, you're going to have run out of your stores, and there's going to be an energy imbalance that you're going to have to manage by slowing way down so you can get back more into a fat metabolism area. The same goes for, shorter distance events. If you go too hard, let's say it's a 5K run, and you go too hard for the first 10 minutes, again, you're going to have to back off because you're burning out your energy system as well as your ability to stay over threshold. The other part of the lactate threshold with heart rate training and physiology is that over lactate threshold means you're producing more lactate than you can break down, and that's going to impede your ability to continue the exercise at that effort level, right? So these are the reasons coaches and experienced athletes establish their training zones so that A, they can train at the proper effort level in training, and B, they can race at the proper effort level in racing. The easiest mistakes people make is going too hard on the first part of the bike and too hard on the first part of the run in longer triathlons. So figure out your zones and everything goes from there.